Hi, I'm Don from DonDronesOn. I was invited to talk about the Canadian drone regulations in a webinar recently, and so if you're interested, here's a recording of that event that took place on February the 7th, 2024. Jessica Hobbins was the host and is the manager of the Young Professionals Network within BeSpatial. BeSpatial is a volunteer-run group that aims to provide opportunities, programs, and services to those in the Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, profession. Very cool. So here's my presentation and subsequent Q&A session.
So hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I asked that if you think of any questions as we go, could you please pop them into the chat and we'll have a little Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So today we are joined by Joyce, an influential figure in the Canadian drone community. Chances are, if you ever had an interest in drones and live in Canada, you know of Don. His DonDronesOn YouTube channel features easy to follow videos covering all aspects of safe and legal drone flight in Canada. There is little doubt more Canadian drone pilots have learned from DonDronesOn than any other single training resource. In addition, his Drone Pilot Canada mobile app makes safe drone flight easy with regularly updated fly safe maps, checklists, procedures, site survey tools, and more. And on top of that, Don leads the Drone Pilot Association of Canada, aka DPAC, representing recreational and small commercial drone pilots. DPAC meets frequently with Transport Canada to advocate for safe and reasonable drone regulations and exams. And Don lives in Class G airspace halfway between Toronto and Ottawa, Ontario. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Don.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jess. So what I'm going to do is give you guys a very, I'll say, simplistic view of the regulations in Canada for flying drones and some of the tools and different things that you can use to fly more safely. Okay, so the idea is really, who can fly, what can you fly, when can you fly, where can you fly, and how. We skipped the why because everyone knows why, because it's fun. So what are the drone regulations all about? It's really, you can get lost in the regulations, but the best way to think about it is that the regulations are set up to manage risk. So there's three things: minimizing the risk to manned aviation and people on the ground. That's the main thing that the whole regulations are designed to do. But they're also designed to make it relatively easy to fly drones in what could be viewed as low-risk situations. So if you're well away from an airport, for example, but allow people who have more training and more experience to do higher risk operations. So in controlled airspace, closer to people, that kind of thing. So if we look at the layers of the regulations, they basically break down into four chunks. At the bottom, the lowest risk types of activities are done by what they call micro drones, which are drones under 250 grams, often called sub 250 gram drones. The next layer up is a group of operations or types of flights called basic operations. And to summarize those, they're when you're flying well away from airports and heliports and relatively far away from people. And that's with any drone between 250 grams and 25 kilograms. The next more complex and riskier type of operation is called an advanced operation. And in this case, instead of being away from an airport, you're actually relatively near an airport. You're not flying in front of the control tower, but you might be, a kilometer away, that kind of thing. So advanced operations are near airports and heliports, typically in controlled airspace, and they can be within, closer to people. And then for more complex operations and for any drone that's over 25 kilograms, there's a separate class of operations up here. So if we walk through those, just kind of going back to the bottom, the micro drones, so these are the rules in very, very simplistic fashion. So for micro drones, you don't have to register your drone. You don't have to have any sort of pilot certification, so there's no exam or anything like that. And there are very, very few rules that apply to microdrones. The main thing is, well, I'll cover it in more detail later, but it's basically just don't do anything stupid. Don't fly at airplanes. Don't fly anywhere near airports. Don't, fly into people's hair, that kind of stuff. So don't do anything stupid. If you're sensible, fly your drone in a manner that's is nice, in quotation marks, you're good to go with a micro drone. Oh, and one thing that covers all of this stuff, and I don't think I cover this anywhere else, so I should have mentioned it, is that in Canada, the regulations don't care why you are flying. Doesn't matter whether it's for fun or because you're a business or a government or anything like that. It makes no differentiation between recreational and commercial flying. It's all the same rules, all the same stuff applies. So that was micro drones. The next level of risk up is basic operations. Now, if you're flying a basic operation, which means mainly you have a slightly heavier drone than a micro drone, so anything like a Mavic 2, a Mavic 3, and anything up into the M300s and that kind of stuff, you need to register your drone. And it's pretty easy. It's $5. It's a one-time fee, lasts forever. You also have to pass the basic RPAS pilot exam, which is not too terrible. It's $10. It's online. It's open book, so you can have stuff from me, for example, open on your screen while you're going through this exam, and you have lots of time to do it. And the pass rate is, what is it, 60% or 65%? It's pretty lenient. So fairly easy to get your basic pilot certification. Once you have that, you do need to stay well away from airports, heliports, and controlled airspace, and there's specific distances. You need to stay 30 meters away from people, so about 100 feet. And this is a fundamental rule and pretty much universal across all countries, is that you need to stay under 120 meters of altitude above the ground. All right, so that's basic operations. Once you're getting into more risky things, they're called advanced operations, but many of the rules are the same. So you still need to register your drone. It's a $5 one-time fee. And when you register your drone, you get a number from Transport Canada, and you can either stick it on with a sticker, which is what I do, or you can write it on with a Sharpie or anything like that that's relatively permanent, is how you mark your drone with your registration number. You do need to pass the advanced RPAS pilot exam, which is also $10 per attempt. It's also online. It's also open book, but it is hellish to get through. So this exam has tougher questions. You have far less time. The pass rate is 80%, and the questions are much more tricky. So I've done it several times now and have successfully passed almost every time. I sweat whenever I do it. I regularly do it just kind of for practice and to see what they've changed in the questions. I sweat like a pig when I take this exam. It is stressful. And then once you get the exam, you also have to pass an in-person flight review. So you have to book time with a person who's a certified flight reviewer, and they watch you make a little flight, basically a mock flight, a real flight, but not you're not surveying land or anything like that. And their main focus of this is to really test to see if you're really somebody who knows what they're doing and are safety oriented. So doing a lot of planning, making sure that you're not near airports, the emergency numbers and things like that. It's not hard compared to the exam itself. Now, once you have that, you can fly near airports and heliports and in controlled airspace. You do need to have appropriate approval to do that, and there's ways to do that. And in the case of flying near airports, you need to contact the airport and coordinate your flight so you're not interfering with whatever they're doing. Now, if you have the right kind of drone, you can fly up to 5 meters away from people. So that's, or Peter, which is a lot closer than with your basic. Your basic is 30 meters. But you do still need to stay under 120 meters above ground level. Right? And then for anything else, anything that's not basic and not advanced, these are all what are considered riskier operations. And you need to have a special flight operations certificate, or an SFOC, which you get by applying to Transport Canada. And there's different types of things for that. And one other thing that isn't particularly risky that you need an SFOC for is if you're not a Canadian citizen or permanent resident, or a government or operating as a government agency. So you do need a special flight operations certificate, basically if you're a tourist or a foreign student or things like that. Okay, so those are the 4 basic layers of the regulations. I mentioned one rule, the don't do anything stupid rule, that applies to everyone and all drones, regardless of the size. And this is what is called 900.06, reckless or negligent operation. So that rule says no person shall operate a remotely piloted aircraft system, which is what Transport Canada calls drones, remotely piloted aircraft systems, RPAS, in such a reckless or negligent manner as to endanger or be likely to endanger aviation safety or the safety of any person. So that means you need to stay well away from anywhere that manned aircraft are flying or might be flying. So I live out in the boonies, but I'm on a lake, and occasionally a seaplane lands on the lake or takes off from the lake. I have to be really careful of that. Even though it's not an airport, I need to be aware of and keep my ears open for seaplanes, for helicopters, and stuff like that. And don't fly recklessly around people. So this is fundamental to everybody and everything. Don't do anything stupid with your drone. Now, there's lots of rules, and I've only kind of touched the tips of the waves with these ones that I'm going to go through. But if you know these, you're well on your way to being a safe pilot. So the first thing is to always keep your drone within visual line of sight. In other words, you can actually see where your drone is. You have an idea of what's going on around it in terms of obstacles. So you might be flying and you can see it, but are you aware that there's this big hydro line right above your drone? That kind of thing. So they want to make sure that you are in visual line of sight, or your drone is in visual line of sight. And that's without any binoculars or anything like that. You can wear glasses, but you need to be able to see it basically with your normal vision. Second rule is don't fly over people, especially crowds. Now, if you have a drone that is certified to fly over people, that typically means that it has a parachute attached to it. That's about the only mechanism that they allow. There are some exceptions, but you have to have special devices basically to fly over people. And by over people, they mean anywhere within 5 meters measured horizontally near people. And they really don't want you to fly over crowds. Even with the micro drones, you need to be incredibly careful flying over crowds, because if your drone does fail, and drones do fail, you want to make sure that you're not going to hit anybody. And if it's a crowd, they can't get out of the way. They might not hear you because typically crowds are noisy. So yeah, don't fly over crowds if you can avoid it at all. Don't fly in restricted areas. So there's very specific places that are marked out on maps and in apps that are called restricted zones. And these exist near the places like the Parliament buildings, over certain prisons. Niagara Falls is a restricted zone. These ones are typically called Class F restricted zones. But another type of restricted zone is national parks. Parks Canada controls these. They don't want you flying from them, and they don't really want you flying over them either, because that can disturb wildlife and it can disturb people who are enjoying the park themselves. Now, how do you know where all these places are? I'll tell you about that in a minute, because there's some very helpful tools that are available to you that can very quickly highlight where you can and cannot fly. Stay away from emergency areas. Now, if you see a car accident and you happen to be in a drone and you're kind of close by, or a fire or something like that, it can be very tempting to pop your drone up to get that cool aerial view or share a picture on Facebook or things like that. That is so dangerous, it's unbelievable. Not because of the car accident, but because first responders are using drones more and more for their situational awareness of, the big car accident on the 401, or a fire in a building or things like that. The firemen are using drones all the time to better manage their thing. And if your drone is up there, you're going to get in the way, and they're going to have to be grounded because they have very strict rules about how they fly. And wildfires in particular are a very special case. We do have wildfires in Ontario, but more out west. There's many, many more wildfires. As you know, this last year was absolutely terrible for those. And you need to stay, I should know this, I think it's 8 nautical miles, so about 16 kilometers. I could be off by that, but very far away from the perimeter of any sort of wildfire zone. You do not want to interfere with any air operations around a wildfire. So stay away from emergency areas. Try not to be tempted to pop your drone up and catch the tornado damage in your area, that kind of stuff. This isn't a drone rule, this next one, but it is a law. There are privacy laws in Canada that you must respect people's property and privacy. So by respecting people's property, I mean, don't walk onto somebody's property to launch your drone. This is trespassing. Make sure that you're either on public property, that the public property doesn't have special drone rules, and or you have permission. Go up and ask your neighbor, can I stand on your lawn for a few minutes while I fly my drone? Well, my house gets the new roof or whatever is going on. And respect people's privacy. The fundamental rule here, it's very complicated, but the fundamental privacy rule is don't take pictures of people where they would have some reasonable expectation of privacy, not being, so don't take pictures of people in their backyards. Try not to take pictures don't take pictures of people through their windows or anything like that. I'm actually going to be doing a video about privacy at some point in the future, and so that's a very interesting topic. And if you talk to someone who's not a drone pilot, that's often the very first thing that comes up in the conversation. And last but not least, have fun. Be safe. Don't get in the way of emergency vehicles. Don't be looking in people's windows, but have fun. It is a very fun hobby. And if it happens to be your job, well, even better. You got a fun job, and yeah, it can be a lot of fun. A few things to share with you. The Drone Pilot Association of Canada, we're just coming up on our 2nd anniversary of being in existence. I'm the leader of DPAC, and I've got a small team that helps me out. I call it a steering committee. What we do is we represent recreational and small commercial drone pilots, and we promote safety, and we strive to have a reasonable regulatory environment in Canada. Our rules are pretty good compared to some countries, but they could be better. They could be more well-defined. They could be a little more reasonable about flying, for example, in city parks and things like that. So we're fighting very hard to have a reasonable regulatory environment in Canada. It's free to join the website. There's a link there at the bottom there, and if Jess sends out a package, that'll be a live link. But it's not hard to find it. Drone Pilot Association of Canada. We have about under 3,000 members right now. And as I said, we're led by a small steering committee, and I'm the president of that committee. And we meet regularly with Transport Canada. And the cool thing is Transport Canada responds. Like used to be when I would ask them a question, it would, maybe they'd answer in a couple of weeks. Now, when anybody on our steering committee pings Transport Canada with a question, they get back within 24 hours. Fast, reasonable, polite, cooperative. The TC people that we work with are very, very good. One of the things that we did just recently, I guess I think it was the fall of 2023, is we developed our own safety course. And this is an online course. It's free, and it is a fabulous introduction to safe and legal drone and RC aircraft use in Canada. It covers the rules, the category of drone operations, basically expands on the things that I've talked about today, and covers things like knowing your drones, because that's important to understand how it basically works and what it can and cannot do, some limitations. The course also gets into some good best practices, and it tests your knowledge along the way with short little quizzes. They're all multiple choice. They're all fun. And at the end of the day, you get a downloadable certificate that you can print off and you can put it on your fridge. I have it on my fridge. So yeah. And the one other little rule about flying in Canada is that when you do get your pilot certificate, it's good forever, but you need to do what they call recency events every 2 years. And this course it qualifies as one of these 2-year recency requirements. So if you're getting to the end of your 2-year or have had your pilot license for a couple of years, you can take this course, and it basically renews you for another 2 years. Okay, and there's a link to the course there at the bottom. Useful tools. I mentioned that you need to stay away from airports and controlled airspace and restricted areas and all this other stuff. So there's 3 really useful tools that will help you here. The first 2 are free. The drone site selection tool. It's a website, and it'll help you with where airports are and controlled airspace. The second one is also free. It's called Nav Drone. It's put out by Nav Canada. It is both an app and a website, and it'll do everything that the drone site selection tool will do. It will also show you temporary no-fly zones. So, for example, if there's a the Grey Cup game, for example, has a temporary no-fly zone around it, and it'll show those on the map. And this is the one and only way, this tool, to get authorization for flying in controlled airspace. There's only one catch with the tool, is it's not very user-friendly. Drone Pilot Canada is also an app, and this is my own app that I developed in concert with a development partner. And I'll just say it does everything except that authorization. It'll show you where everything is. It'll show you the no-fly zones. It allows you to store documents. It has checklists and procedures in it. You can keep your flight and maintenance logs, which are other rules that you need to be aware of. And it also allows you to do site surveys. It is not free. It's $60. Otherwise, I starve. But it is a one-time fee, and we update it every 56 days as aerodromes get updated. Last but not least, my own free video training. As Jess mentioned, a lot of people are aware of my YouTube channel. I have a complete range of free video training for Canadian drone pilots, covering the exams as well as safety topics. Some of my more popular videos are the study guides for the basic operations exam, the advanced operations, as well as flight reviews. A really important video to watch is the airspace, airports, and aerodromes video. And I also have videos for how the regulations apply to the sub 250 gram drones, like the DJI Mini 4 Pro. Okay, so I've got a YouTube channel. One of the things on my YouTube channel is a free training roadmap. It's a downloadable PDF that gives you all a nice way to walk through the various videos that I have that are applicable to either the basic or the advanced or both, stuff like that. All right, so I think that was it. Yes, it is. Now, how do I get out of this? Sorry.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Don.
You're welcome. Yes.
And I will be posting the resources that Don has shared and his slides to the members area, so as well as a recording. So everybody keep an eye out for that. If anyone has any questions, please pop them into the chat. We have one. Can you elaborate on the different categories of drones and how the regulations may vary based on the type of drone and the purpose of its use?
Okay, I'll start at the end. There's no differentiation in terms of the use of the drone, whether it's recreational or commercial. There's no differentiation in that. There are different categories of drones for, in particular for advanced operations, because you need to have a drone that is qualified or eligible is the actual technically correct term, eligible for either flying in controlled airspace, near people, which is between 5 and 30 meters, or over people, which is 5 meters. So there's a list on the Transport Canada drone safety website that will show you all of the drones that and what their classification is. So one thing that's quite interesting is just in the last few days, Transport Canada has gone through and they've removed 15% of the drones that were on that list. I only know that because I'm putting out a video
Right.
probably tomorrow that goes through the details of that. But there are different reasons for why they did it. How the regulations vary based on that type? Well, the regulations aren't different, but what you can and cannot fly is based on what drone you're flying, what exact model you're flying.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. They just updated that list.
Yeah.
We have a question. Are fixed wings allowed for recreational use?
Yes, absolutely. So I use the term drone, and sometimes Transport Canada does as well. The official term is RPAS, Remotely Piloted Aircraft System, and that encompasses quadcopters, hexcopters, things of that nature that we normally call drones, as well as remote controlled aircraft and remote controlled helicopters. So yes, fixed wing remote controlled devices are covered by exactly the same rules, same exam, same certificate, all that kind of stuff. And yes, you can fly them for recreational use. There's been a bit of a wrinkle around that with what's called the MAC. What does MAC stand for now? Model Aircraft Association of Canada. Just came to me. They used to have an exemption from the rules as long as they were flying within their own rule set at their own flight areas. That exemption was removed at the end of 2022, I believe it was. And so they've been struggling with that problem, but they are allowed, as long as they're following the Transport Canada rules, to fly fixed wing models. Yes.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned how micro drones are the lowest risk and therefore have the least regulations. Other than like, the don't do anything stupid rule, is it almost like a free for all otherwise? Like, can I fly over people and close to buildings with a sub 250-gram drone?
Well, technically, yes, you can fly over people. Like I said, you always need to be careful flying over people, because if it falls, you're the person that's liable if you take somebody's eye out with a fast rotating propeller. But there are some other little rules, not little rules, significant rules that apply to micro drones. Number one is you cannot go into any of those Class F restricted zones that I mentioned, like around the Parliament buildings, Niagara Falls, Confederation Bridge, things of that nature. You also cannot fly in NOTAM identified zones that are temporary flight restrictions. So one example that just popped into my head was when the truckers' protest was in downtown Ottawa. There was a NOTAM put in place, that stands for Notice to Airmen, that no aircraft, including drones of all sizes, could fly in that area that was defined very specifically, unless you're authorized to do so. So there were police drones that were in there. There were a couple of CBC drones that had authorization as well. But all those other videos you saw, even if they were with micro drones, were illegal.
Okay.
So Class F restricted zones, no TAMs. You also can't fly in within that, whatever that distance is, that unfortunately my brain refuses to give me, within wildfires. So you got to keep any sort of drone away from there. But
Okay.
otherwise, it is, I wouldn't want to say free for all,
Right.
but it's very easy. And I fly a Mini Ford Pro, and that's my go-to drone because I don't have to worry about so many things.
Right. Yeah, definitely more versatile. Um, we have a question. From your perspective, what are the main factors limiting more widespread use, and how do you see the technology evolving over the next few years?
Wow, complicated question. Thank you. Um, so the main factors limiting more widespread use, it depends on what you're trying to do. So, for example, there are quite a few companies that are striving to get cargo drones in place, and not so much the Amazon stuff where they drop the thing on your porch, and which frankly I don't think will ever really happen. At least not around any cities, or
Yeah.
like you can't get to my place, for example. But cargo drones, like taking cargo to remote locations in the Arctic and things like that, where it's very difficult, very expensive to fly a plane in, or maybe not even possible to get a truck to. I think that is one area that's going to grow a lot. But right now, Transport Canada does not allow you to fly beyond visual line of sight with your drone
Right.
unless you have one of those SFOCs. And they're difficult to get and they're very restrictive. So I think that's one area that is limiting some of the more commercial and very powerful applications for drones. So uh, beyond visual line of sight rules, larger drones, same thing. You can't fly that without a drone over 25 kilograms without an SFOC. So I think those are the main things that are limiting, really expanding into really, really, really cool applications for drones.
Right.
How do you see the technology evolving? Well, I think that we're going to see even more capable tiny drones, for one thing. We're going to see much higher resolution cameras and other sensors that are extremely useful for mapping, for surveying, which you guys are into. So I think we're going to see much more capability in that regard, and a lot more capability in the back end processing capability of the data that you get from these tools. So I think we're going to see a lot more there, and I think we're going to see more in terms of safety related to obstacle sensors and ability to uh, detect manned aircraft and warn pilots, the drone pilots, that there is a manned aircraft in the vicinity. Some of the more expensive drones, like the Mavic 3, for example, do that, but other drones don't have that capability at the moment. And there's some technical limitations because, well, not a technical limitation, but a reality limitation, that not all aircraft carry transmitters that allow drones to pick up the fact that there's a guy coming in over that line of trees that you can't see or hear.
Right.
So yeah.
I guess this kind of follows the vein of talking about how difficult and tedious it can be to get like a SFOC. Are there any major steps you think Transport Canada could take to improve drone use?
Yeah, there's some areas of SFOC use or SFOC requirements that I think don't make sense. One, for example, is the foreign pilots that I mentioned. Not that probably doesn't apply to anyone on this call, but that's one that I think they could simplify down to, if you have a drone license from your country, the same, they could map them into our drone certificates. Um, they have a weird requirement for an SFOC near a military aerodrome, which kind of makes sense on the surface. But on the other hand, why is Transport Canada getting in the way? Why can't we just, like any other airport, connect with the aerodrome in question and coordinate the flight directly? I mean, it just
Right.
makes more sense to cut out the middleman. So yeah, there's some things that they can make easier for sure.
Peter, he's from the MTO, and he asks, we sometimes get inquiries about flying drones over highways. What are your thoughts and general thoughts among pilots?
That's a good one. I mean, so from a Transport Canada regulatory perspective, there's no law that specifically applies to highways or roads or anything like that. You can fly over them back and forth. You can hover over them 1 inch off the ground from a Transport Canada RPAS regulation perspective. They don't, it doesn't really matter. From a practical perspective, though, there's a couple of things to consider. First of all, there are people on highways that are unprotected. So all of the rules around flying over people apply if you are in an unprotected vehicle, like a motorcycle or a convertible or anything like that. So you have to be if you're on a barren highway in the middle of winter, you're unlikely to encounter somebody on a motorcycle. But in the summer, you do have to be aware that you might be over a person, a bystander, basically. And so you have to be careful in that regard. The other thing, though, which is I think is more important, is if you are low enough and are close enough to a highway, not even necessarily right over it, you can be a distraction to drivers. And you know what it's like when you're flying along and you see a plane, or a bird or something like that. You can be
Yeah.
distracted as a driver. And if you're flying your drone in such a way that you are not necessarily alarming drivers because you're so low, but you're up there in the air and you're causing a distraction, I think that's a problem. So in general, I would recommend people try to stay away from that kind of situation, and not fly their drones over highways. But yeah, from a
Yeah.
regulatory perspective, there's nothing specific.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Stephen asks, what's the average battery life in minutes for most drones?
For most drones, like like the Mavic series of DJI drones, it's in the 30-minute range. It's a little bit less in the winter because batteries don't operate as well in the winter, and as they get lower, they can drain very, very quickly. But roughly 30 minutes. Yeah.
Right. So if my DJI drone has geofencing around airports and collision detection and stuff like that, is that good enough, or should I still consult tools like Drone Pilot Canada?
You definitely need to consult tools. The geofencing that's in DJI drones is good. There's no question about it, because at the very least it gives you a warning that you might be close to something, or potentially causing some risk. But they don't the geofencing rules in DJI do not correspond to Transport Canada rules. There are some things that are in the DJI geofences that are not restricted areas. Like near me, for example, there's a prison in Napanee. Now, you shouldn't be flying over prisons anyway, but from a Transport Canada perspective, it is not a restricted zone. But DJI has it flagged off as a restricted zone. So just as an example, so there's some that are in DJI that are not in Transport Canada. But what is more concerning is that things like Class F restricted zones, say around the Parliament buildings, the geofencing is just a warning. It says, oh, by the way, you're in a restricted zone. Do you want to fly there? If you hit OK, you're okay to fly. And that's
Right.
not valid. I mean, that's absolutely not valid. And the areas around airports, they don't have all the airports, they don't have all the heliports. They have good restricted zones. I like the way DJI shows where the runways are and things like that. It's kind of this bow tie appearance where it kind of gets wider the farther away you are from the airports. But it doesn't correspond to the Transport Canada restrictions. So just because you don't get a warning does not mean you're not breaking the law.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm surprised that you can fly over prisons. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's obviously you can't drop things into prisons
Right.
or things like that, but there are about, I'm going to say, roughly 20 prisons, like the larger prisons, that are Class F restricted zones in Canada. But the smaller prisons, and like the, what's it called, the Quinte Detention Center, I think it is, the one in Napanee. A lot of big criminals in there, but it's not a restricted zone from a Transport Canada perspective. Yeah. So yes, you need to consult Drone Pilot Canada, NavDrone, or the drone site selection tool. And by the way, Drone Pilot Canada shows you both views. There's a little selector switch, so you can see Transport Canada views, or you can see the DJI views. And that way, when you're planning your flight, you know in advance, oh crap, I'm going to run into that blue zone from DJI.
Oh yeah, that's super valuable.
Yeah.
Courtney asks, are there specific protocols for reporting accidents or incidents involving drones?
Yes, there are. There's specific protocols for an accident, and there are 3 criteria. Oh, this is a skill testing question. So if you crash your drone into a manned aircraft or vice versa, if there's a collision between a manned aircraft and a drone, you have to report that to the Transportation Safety Board. If there's a serious injury, and I believe there's definition for what's serious, with somebody on the ground with your drone, if you nick your finger when you're hand catching, that doesn't count. But if you fly into somebody and cause a laceration or something like that, it definitely does count. You have to report that to the Transportation Safety Board. And the third item is if your drone is over 25 kilograms. I think those are the 3 criteria for reporting to the Transportation Safety Board. Otherwise, like if you fly your drone and crash into the tree, you do not need to report that. The regulation says if you have some sort of an incident like that, you need to stop your flight if the tree didn't already stop it, and make corrective action so that it doesn't happen again. But you don't have to report it to anyone. So if you fly into a tree, clearly you need to cut the tree down before you fly in that area again. Sorry, not nice to bug trees. Sorry.
Peter from the MTO, just to follow up on our flying over highways discussion, he says he concurs with your highway thoughts. And he would also add that in their AIM document, Transport Canada recommends flying near critical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And he thinks that certainly main highways would fall within that definition, so like 400 series highways.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. The problem I have with first of all, the AIM document is wonderful. That's the Aeronautical Information Manual. It's a document that Transport Canada puts out, and it basically interprets all of the regulations in fairly easy to understand language. And they do add on top of the regulations some recommendations, such as avoiding critical infrastructure. One criticism I have is that they don't define what a critical infrastructure is. I actually looked it up one day. What is critical infrastructure? And it turns out that banks are critical infrastructure. It's like, that's confusing. You can't fly near a bank. But I think, if you use kind of common sense and realize if you're flying over a major highway or a nuclear power plant or, even a hydro dam potentially, you could be causing risk that could screw up a lot of people's lives, and you don't want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. He also added Ontario Regulation 627 under the Highway Traffic Act prohibits all pedestrian use of controlled access highways, so launching or landing from CAH corridor would not be allowed other than for police or construction work.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. That's cool. And a controlled access highway would be like the 401, I presume, like with interchanges as opposed to Highway 7, like, heads into Peterborough or whatever.
Right. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Cool.
Patrick asks, if I were to fly over an active construction project, so think work sites where staff have full PPE, like hard hats, and are fully aware of the drone flight, would this still be considered flying over people from the Transport Canada perspective?
That's a good question. This whole flying over or near people is defined as people who are not involved in the operation. That's the technical phrase, not involved in the operation. So if you are involved in the operation, then the rule doesn't apply. So for example, you can fly over yourself as a pilot. If you have a visual observer standing beside you, helping you out, you can fly over them. If you're flying over your family picnic and everyone knows that you're flying your drone there, they are part of the operation, and you can fly over them quite freely. It's bystanders, basically people who don't know what is going on, that are the ones that they don't want you to put at risk. So a construction project, let's take the hard hat thing off the table just for a moment. If you've got people in a construction area, and you want to fly a drone over them, they need to be aware, from a legal perspective, that you are flying your drone over them and that there is some level of risk that it could fall. Now, if they are wearing hard hats, I would argue that you should still need to tell them. I think that's the best thing to do, but I would think your risk level would be considerably less than if they didn't have hard hats on. So yeah, it wouldn't be considered flying over people as long as they've been informed that there could be a drone flying over them. It's tricky though. It's very tricky.
Yeah. That's the kind of question they would ask on the exam. One of those niche tricky ones that you're not quite sure of the answer.
Oh yeah, they can. Yeah.
Speaking of which, so how hard?
Just by the way, if you are asked a question that seems really ambiguous like that on the exam, the correct answer is always the safest one, which would be, no, don't fly over the construction area or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Yeah, let's talk about how hard the exam is. I think it's pretty common that people, they say that advanced is almost impossible. A lot of people fail it on their first go.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly failed it on my first go. I wish I had my videos when I took it, but it is very tough. The advanced exam is very tough, and as I said, there's the questions are harder than on the basic. There's still multiple choice questions, so and it's still open book, so it's not terrible. It's not impossible, but you have so little time. I did the math one day. I think it's just a little over a minute per question, and you can only get 5 questions wrong out of 40. Is that right? I think that's the right ratio. Something like that. Anyway, maybe it's only 4. So it's very, very difficult to pass the exam. The key to passing the exam is to be prepared. So know what the kind of stuff that you're going to get into. So I've got all sorts of videos. My advanced study guide gives you a broad overview of the kinds of questions you can expect. And then for each of the areas, like how do drones fly, like the whole theory of flight and all that sort of thing, I have videos that go through all of that stuff. And I also sell, I'm not trying to sell things, but I do sell PDFs that are basically a compendium of the slideware that I use in my videos. So I sell like a study guide for the advanced. I think it's $60, and it's a book. It's like 230 odd pages of slides, and you can have that open, soft copy open, or hard copy, but soft copy open on your desktop when you take the exam. And it's like, oh yeah, that weird question, and you can find it in the stuff because it's searchable. And if there's further information like links and stuff like that, they're all active links in the PDF. So yeah, being prepared, having your key documents, having the AIM open, for example, are really important tips for getting through it. The other thing is that when you're going through the exam, particularly the advanced, but even for the basic, if you encounter a question that you're not sure, you guess that the answer is D, write down the number, write down, okay, question number 20, I wrote, I don't know if this one's right. And then if you have time at the end, which questions to go back to and really, maybe look up the next level of links or read some other thing, because you actually have a little bit of time to read things if you're prepared on say if you're prepared for 80% of the questions and you can whip those off really fast, you're only left with the remaining 20%. You might have time to do a little bit of on the fly research. So keep track of the ones you're doubtful about on a little list.
Great, yeah, great tips. And you mentioned recency requirements and how the DPAC safety course qualifies.
Yeah.
What other things could people do to meet those requirements?
There's actually I have a video on recency, and
Okay.
I'm trying to remember what all the options are. One thing you can do is actually just take one of the exams again. Even if you have your advanced, taking the basic, as long as you pass, counts as recency. There are things called rust removers that different organizations like COPA put out. And these are either live or online sessions where you can listen in, and you get some sort of a document at the end of it saying that you have successfully completed a recency event. There's probably about a dozen different ground schools put out their own recency packages. I have one, for example. I don't know why I still have it, but I do. It's $15, and it's very straightforward and very pertinent. And there's a free thing that Transport Canada puts out that it counts as recency. It's basically a little, almost like an exam, a little multiple choice thing. The thing I don't like about it is most of the questions have nothing to do with drones. So even though they actually give you the answer and a little bit of explanation of why it is the right answer, it has nothing to do with drones. So it's kind of, I don't know, I just get angry at stuff like that.
Great.
I
That's
have
fair.
issues.
That's
Yes.
fair. I just have one last question. How do you think the public perception of drones has evolved over the years, and what challenges do drone enthusiasts still face in terms of public acceptance?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, Jess. I would say that the public perception of drones probably I'm going to say has deteriorated over time. The more drones that are out there, the more talk about drones and, the Gatwick incident and stuff like that. I think people who, don't have much to do with drones, don't know anything about drones, don't know all the nonsense we have to go through to be allowed to fly a drone,
Right.
tend to think that people who fly drones are idiots and reckless and are out to look for just a second, hold on a second, try to stop this thing. Sorry, my phone was ringing.
Okay.
They think that you're out to invade their privacy. You see a drone flying overhead, you just people tend to assume that they're looking in their backyard,
Right.
which 99% of the time they're not. So I think the public's perception is not very good, frankly. One thing that DPAC does is we have drone awareness days called Drone Discovery Days. We hold them actually in Kingston in Ontario, where the public is invited and you can come and you can talk to actual drone people and hold a drone in your hand and see what it's all about. And I hope my videos are getting out there to people who don't necessarily fly drones, but at least it shows that some of the stuff that's behind the requirements, the certificates and things like that. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, I would agree that I think, it just takes a couple bad stories to kind of make people paranoid about drones and the what ifs. But yeah, just getting more awareness and organizations like DPAC
Yeah.
to just, it's not so bad. Well, I think that about brings us to the end. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much, Don. This has been super informative. I learned a lot. There's just so much to know about all the rules, and everything's so involved that, there's always something that you didn't realize that was
Yeah.
a rule or it wasn't a rule or.
Yeah, there's a lot, but at the same time, it doesn't need to be overwhelming. You could
Right.
anyone can do it. I can even fly. So
Yeah. And Patrick says you are a legend in the Canadian drone space, and your
yeah,
videos have helped me personally with my advanced RPAS certification. Yes, I did also sweat during the test. Yeah, I totally agree. I wouldn't have survived my advanced ops without your training resources either.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I actually have a video of me taking the exam. I mean, it's kind of a boring 1 hour, but there you go.
Yeah, no, it makes you so. Mine, when I was taking it, it crashed on me and I was already panicking. And then the Transport Canada website crashed and that just sent me
Nice.
into a spiral. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What did I do? How do I get
Yeah.
better?
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll be posting all of Dawn's resources and the recording, and I will send the recording to you as well, Dawn.
Thank you.
And so everybody keep an eye out for that. And thanks again.
Great. Thanks for having me, Jess.
Thank you so much.